it's Yrjö and it's time for another video. Today, in honor of Finland celebrating its 100th Independence Day, I want to talk about some Finnish classics. But first, a quick history lesson.
Yes, my children, it is time for a history lesson. Now, back in the old days, Sweden used to come crusading down the Finnish coast to try and convert us pagans into proper Christians. And in the 1300s they full-on invaded, and Finland was part of Sweden for well over 500 years, until they lost us over to Russia in 1809. We had some fun times with the Romanovs, and back when the Romanovs were ousted and the Bolsheviks decided to take over Russia, we thought it better to start getting independent. And that's how we got our independence, not through war, but through paperwork. Yes, now you should be up to speed.
Okay, now that that's out of the way, I want to talk about a few classic authors that I've really enjoyed reading and that I feel have had a tremendous impact on my reading, and also who mean a great deal to me when I think about independence in general, because when I think about independence, I think about language. And the reason I think about language is that for the longest time that wasn't something that was to be taken granted if you were a Finnish person, because back when Finland was governed by Sweden, you really couldn't advance in society unless you were fluent in Swedish. All the higher education was offered in Swedish, there was no Finnish tuition. All the publications were in Swedish. So what that means to me is that because we are independent, I can attend school in Finnish in my native language. I can read books in my native language, and all the news I can consume in my native language. And that is not something that I take for granted. And I want to talk about a few authors that, in my opinion, really helped make the Finnish language worthy of literary merit. Because for the longest time, Finnish wasn't considered to be a language of literature. First up, I want to talk about Minna Canth, who was the first female editor-in-chief and first woman to own her own newspaper and publish her own newspaper, and she published it in Finnish. She was also very vocal about universal suffrage, and she wrote a lot of plays and novels debating classism and also women's place in society, and she wrote a lot of essays and plays that tackled huge social issues of her time. And one of my favorite works by her is Anna-Liisa, which is a play that was published in 1895. And that play details the life of Anna-Liisa, who, when she is a young girl, has a relationship, an affair out of wedlock with a servant, or not a servant, but a stableman. And she gets pregnant out of wedlock, and the man leaves her. He goes away in search of another job, in search of money. And that leaves Anna-Liisa in a huge predicament. She can't have an abortion because that potentially would kill her. So she decides to confide in another woman, in a servant, who helps her hide her pregnancy, and when she is due, takes her to the forest where she gives birth, and she buries the child there. And after that, Anna-Liisa has a period of happiness. She meets a new man, and she is getting ready to get married when her old lover decides to return and promptly blackmails her about the baby they have together. And this play really talks about all the struggles women had during those days, because even though Anna-Liisa is a daughter of a manor house, she is quite well off. She still doesn't have agency over her own body, and she basically doesn't have the freedom to decide for herself what she wants to do. And I found this play to be very fascinating and interesting when I first read it, and I've seen it performed a couple of times, and I really love it. Even though it is very tragic and melodramatic, I still really love it and think that it has a lot of important things to say and a lot of important takeaways concerning the Finnish society during the 19th century and even afterwards. Next author I want to talk about is Anni Swan. I've mentioned her previously on this channel. She was basically the author who invented the Finnish young adult girls literature genre. She wrote similar types of novels as Anne of Green Gables. She basically wrote these rags to riches type stories that served as escapism for Finnish children at the time. And she wrote a lot about class struggles. And one of my favorite books by her is Iris Rukka, or Poor Iris, which is about this girl who is orphaned and sent to live with her relatives. And when she gets there, she is basically made a servant to them. And things happen, and in the end she finds out that her father is alive and she is due to inherit this large fortune, and it's basically rags to riches, and it is very, very whimsical and very fun to read, even though Iris goes through a lot during the story. And Anni Swan basically paved the way for other Finnish young adult authors, especially female young adult authors, to have successful careers and write their own stories, because she was the first one to really make a successful career out of it. And then I want to talk about Alexis Kivi, who wrote the famous novel Seven Brothers, or Seitsemän veljestä. And Alexis Kivi is thought to be the very first Finnish author who published a major literary work in Finnish. Seven Brothers was published in 1870, and it was criticized at the time for having these kind of outrageous and unsympathetic portrayals of Finnish peasantry, which kind of went against the grain at the time, because during the time Seven Brothers was published, it was very popular to go kind of slumming in the countryside, and it was a period of romanticism when the bourgeoisie people were really kind of having a kick out of playing at poverty, so to speak. So they would go to farmhouses and paint and write stories and kind of try to blend in with the Finnish lifestyle. And then they kind of created this romanticized picture of what Finnish people and what Finland was at the time. And Alexis Kivi came along and published Seven Brothers, and it is nothing like the romantic picture everyone had of Finnish people. The characters in that book are coarse, they're really flawed, they get into fights, they get drunk, they burn down their own sauna, and it is a very kind of grotesque, but also kind of hopeful picture of what Finnish people are like. And even though the characters are insanely flawed, they also kind of end the story in a really high note, because a few of them get married, one of them learns to read, etc. It's generally considered a very popular classic, and it is one of the few instances of required reading in school that I really enjoyed. And last up, I want to talk about Yrjö Kokko, who is actually a more contemporary author, because he wrote mainly in the 40s and 50s. And During his life, he was a veterinarian and he was also a natural conservationist. He made a lot of efforts, for example, for the Finnish swan to be protected. And he also did a lot of nature photography. But I remember him most from his fairy tale for adults, Pessi ja Illuusio. This is the edition that he has himself photographed all the illustrations in this book. They are all photographs that Yrjö Kokko took. And he wrote Pessi ja Illuusio when he was in the war. And the story actually juxtaposes against the Finnish continuation and winter wars. And the story goes that there is this fairy of light that gets trapped in the earthly world because when she gets lost, she takes shelter for the night and a spider cuts off her wings. So she can't go back to the kingdom of light. And she meets a troll that takes her in, and together they form this friendship and they form a romance together. And they start making their own life together, trying to survive the winter and also making friends of all the animals that are in the forest with them. And the story juxtaposes against the war that is raging on at the same time. And I used to love this story as a kid. I still like it very much. And I've seen the play a couple of times. I've seen the movie that they made, and I've seen the ballet. So this has been adapted into many a form, and I've really enjoyed it. And it is one of the stories that I wish had been translated because it is so unique as a story. And I think that it's perfect for all ages, and it is magnificent. So those are all the classic authors that I wanted to mention and talk about. I think they have done a great service to the Finnish language and made sure that the Finnish language reaches its potential as a literary juggernaut. And I just find it incredibly important that I can have this experience. I can talk about these authors who led these amazing lives and published these amazing stories, and they could do it in their own native language, and they could do it in Finnish and inspire other Finnish authors and inspire the language to grow and evolve and become the language of an independent nation. I think it is amazing. And there you have it. We have come to the end of this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more. And happy Independence Day to Finland! Bye bye!